Okay, we'll go ahead and get started here. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today for the Innovate Pasadena Ask an Expert series. And I am Beth Kuchar. I'm the chairperson of Innovate Pasadena. And today we are joined by Alex Maleki, who is the managing director of Mandala Space Ventures. But Alex was actually a longtime member of the Innovate Pasadena board of directors. So we know Alex really well over here. And he's also an expert at fundraising and helping guide entrepreneurs and startups. And I will let him get into the details on his time at Idea Lab and venture-backed startups, anything he wants to talk about there. But today, Alex is here joining us to answer your questions about exploring and investing in space. So welcome, Alex. Thank you so much for taking time today.
Thanks, Beth. I appreciate it. Thanks, Kayan, and everyone at Innovate Pasadena for hosting me. I'm excited about space, and I'm excited to share why I'm so excited. Just quickly, I'll tell you a bit about Mandala Space Ventures. So we are a venture studio, as far as I know, the only venture studio focused on space. And a venture studio has two components. One is the startup studio side. Well, we'll start companies internally and work on our own ideas and spin those out into their own entities. And then we have an associated venture fund where we're investing in outside entities and helping them scale as well. There's sort of a third leg of that stool, which is we'll onboard companies into the Mandala ecosystem and help them with services and take smaller equity stakes in that sense, but all things space related. Fortunately, it's very broad space. It's very vast, as they say. So we've got a lot of things to work on, and I'm very excited to answer any questions that everybody has today.
Awesome. And we did actually have a few folks that had questions for you ready to go when they signed up to join us today. So we're just going to jump right into some of those questions that were asked previously. But I want to remind everybody in the audience, if you have a question for Alex, please type it in the Q&A and he will get to your question. But the first person asked you, where do you see the next big leap in commercial space and why?
That is a great question and a hard one to answer. And maybe the best way to do it is just tell you why I'm excited about the commercial space ecosystem as a whole. So, there's some very important sort of policy changes from a federal government standpoint and sort of the 2010, 2011 timeframe, where NASA and others started to understand that they didn't need to control the entire process from soup to nuts. They could partner with outside companies, provide funding to third parties to not only accelerate their own ambitions, but to really sort of see what else we could do. So I think that's an important part. Prior to that, if you want to do anything in space, it was government and government alone that was holding tightly on to the reins of that. And then you've got the cost of launching a satellite that has dropped dramatically. I think it was roughly, let's say, $200 million per launch. And now it's less than 60 million. It used to cost something around 500 million to build a satellite. Now you can do it for orders of magnitude less. And I think the most important part of why I'm really excited is, if you were a student or an expert in aerospace, propulsion, or whatever it may be related to space, and you were doing this decades ago, you only had a few places where you could go. You went and worked for the government or, a prime like Lockheed or Raytheon. So you may have studied something else or found a career elsewhere. And now there are literally hundreds of options for people looking for a career related to space. And we're seeing that with all the companies that are being funded. So where do I think it goes from here? I don't know. I mean, that's sort of what I'm excited about. Obviously there's a lot of things in satellite communications. You'll see a lot of new providers launching smaller satellites into LEO. I think defense and climate change are two really interesting things where space can have an impact, and sort of to answer it in a different way, if you look at what has come out of space investing over the years, there's things like the camera in your cell phone, that was created out of NASA. If you look at artificial limbs, some of the first artificial limbs were created out of NASA. Tempur-Pedic was created out of NASA. So you have all these things, autonomous vehicles. The first autonomous vehicles were not done by Cruise or Tesla or all these things. They were putting them on the moon many years ago. So there's all these things that I think have been pushing the boundaries, and I think we'll see more of that in commercial opportunities that arise, and that's really what I'm excited about.
Cool. That does sound exciting. Thank you. So we have another question for you here. How do you validate space startups with no space heritage?
I assume you mean with no space heritage, meaning it's somebody that doesn't have a background in space. And I think, we evaluate it the same way we would any other opportunity. What does the team look like, and how effective can they be at the problem they're solving? And always most importantly, what is the problem that they're solving, and is it a big enough market where it can be venture backable and grow into a big business? So, I think one of the problems with investing in space is a lot of times there's these awesome solutions in need of a problem. And obviously we want to take the opposite approach. We want to start with a large problem, figure out where the opportunities are, and invest accordingly. But I think you need less sort of specific domain expertise, depending upon what you're doing. There's SaaS companies related to space these days. There's communications companies related to space. There's data companies related to space. So unless you're building, propulsion systems or, launching things into orbit, there's probably other opportunities that are available to people who don't have that requisite or used to be requisite domain expertise in space. So you don't need to be a NASA engineer to do it. You do need some, foundational founder attributes. You need to be able to raise money. You need to be able to build a team, and you need to be working on a problem that's worth solving. But outside of that, the space heritage, I think, is less of a concern, certainly for me, than it may be in the minds of others.
Okay. And our next question is actually kind of a twofer here. So what kind of space innovations do investors look for? And then how do you determine if these innovations are sustainable or realistic?
Yeah, interesting. I think with regard to innovations that we're looking for, it's really commercial opportunities. I think that what's been hamstrung in a lot of ways with investing in space is you typically had one customer, which is the government, and being beholden or dependent on one customer is bad for any business, let alone a space business. So, the first thing that we're trying to look at is what are the real commercial opportunities here? Is this just something that we can sell to government or governments? Or is there a larger opportunity? And frankly, from just a general point of view, you're seeing huge opportunities for real commercialization with lots and lots of customers, not just the government. The government is still very important, not only in the funding and from a customer perspective, but we need to see areas where you're branching out of doing that. And how we figure out if it's realistic or sustainable is the way we would look at any problem from an investment standpoint, right? Again, what's the market here? Is a technical risk in a lot of these things. So how are we mitigating that? What's been proven? Has it been proven on a lab bench? Has it been proven theoretically in a paper? Are there other prototypes that have been built that sort of mitigate that risk? And ultimately, we're looking for things that are $100 million revenue potential companies and billion-dollar markets like every other investor looks at. So I don't think there's anything unique necessarily there. But I think the opportunities that are coming down the road with the commercialization of space and space-related technologies is growing massively. And so I think just taking advantage of that, figuring out where those markets are growing and where there may be some low-hanging fruit is something that everyone that's looking into the space is doing. And we're no different.
And then we have a question here. What is the best way to build a prototype to move forward to a finished device with its best iteration?
Okay, I will try to answer this question, at least as I understand it. And maybe the best way to do that is to talk about sort of the studio model. So how would we go about figuring out if there is a there? So the first thing to do is understand, again, the problem. What problem are you solving? And before you write a line of code or you build a mechanical prototype, talking to people to understand that the problem is real and is a real pain point, I think is the first thing I would do. The typical customer discovery things that a lot of companies go through is important in our field as well. And so you know, what's the problem? What's the market? Is there capital being deployed in these areas? Am I building something that's differentiated? You know, am I have some unique angle or some unique technology or IP that I can bring to bear that's going to make this unique unique opportunity for, you know, myself and my team and investors and the market as a whole, and then ultimately, you know, iterating on that process. Again, it could be something like building a bench demo. It could be, you know, if you're building, you know, a SaaS platform in space, it's narrowing down on what the core hypothesis is there and testing and validating those. And so I think, you know, just because you're dealing with things that are, you know, cost $50 million or $100 million, the process is really the same. And I think, you know, right now, the way it used to be is if you were building something space related, you would go to the government and you would get grants and you would get non-dilutive funding, which is great. But they're sort of hamstrung by the requirements of that non-dilutive funding. And you may end up going down a road where you ultimately didn't want to because the funding is attached to that path. And so I think, again, realizing the real commercial opportunity versus just the government funding related to that opportunity is something that we should really be focused on, particularly in this field, because there are a lot of dollars being spent out there to build prototypes from the government or to do things on a particular path with this non-dilutive funding. But it's we joke it's the cocaine funding of the space field, because once you're down that path, it's really hard to get off of it. And we really want to do commercial opportunities. We want to, you know, access things and build things that the broader market can use and take advantage of those revenue opportunities, not just having the government as a sole customer. So a long-winded answer to a sort of difficult question, but I hope I did okay there.
Sounded great to me. So we have a question here from our live audience. Avram asks, are you exposed to and connecting with innovation and the creators coming out of Caltech?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things, Mandala Space Ventures is in Pasadena. You know, our goal really is to have Pasadena be the hub of space entrepreneurship, and there's a reason for that. You know, going back to Los Angeles as a whole, I think I'm going to get the dates wrong, but in 1910, we had the second public demonstration of powered flight, and you had people that were funding that, you know, like the Chandler family and the Huntington family, you know, people who were very wealthy at the time getting involved. And then World War II came and you had a bunch of aerospace activity, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and all sorts of things that were here in the Los Angeles area. And then, of course, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is here in Pasadena. Some would say La Cañada, but it's Pasadena, I believe. That was started in the 30s. Is continuing to be a large part of the space ecosystem. You know, there's something like 6,000 employees there, and Caltech, obviously, some very bright, to put it an understatement of the century, individuals working on things in that area. And so, you know, our goal is definitely to take advantage of you know, what's coming out of Caltech, what's coming out of JPL, what's coming out of a bunch of research institutions around the Los Angeles area, and continue down that path of LA being sort of a global leader in the space industry, and Pasadena in particular, you know, being sort of the hub of intellect and curiosity around the space ecosystem. So absolutely, we want to take advantage of that.
So I want to, we just got a very large or long question here for you from the audience. I was just about to remind folks that they can type their questions in the Q&A. So Rex asks you, and this is a paragraph, Alex, so be prepared. Globally, commercial space has dominated the space economy versus all government expenditures on space since 1997. This fact is not appreciated by most, even in the space business. During the 1980s, most of the commercial activities were focused on satellites providing comm and TV services in geosynchronous orbit, plus some commercial launch and satellite tracking services. Now there are several new commercial markets opening up: smaller rocket launch services, low orbit, small sats, and constellations, commercial cargo and crew delivery into Earth orbit and to the moon. So the question is, how is Mandala Space Ventures segregating these new commercial markets?
How are we segregating these commercial markets? I'm not sure I understand that, but I can tell you these are all areas that we're looking into. Absolutely, LEO, MEO, GEO, there's all sorts of activity happening in each one of these areas. There's a bunch of sensors and detectors that they're being created to do all sorts of things. I think the constellations in LEO taking advantage of lower latency are going to be huge for data transmissions and all sorts of things like that. I think if you look at the number that I've heard is, from a revenue standpoint at least, is the global space industry is somewhere around $350 billion, again, from a revenue standpoint. And that's projected to be north of $1 trillion in the next 15 to 20 years. And so what we're trying to do is figure out, why is that the case? And where will those increases be driven and by whom? And then looking to be as supportive as we can from a venture studio standpoint to put the best entrepreneurs who are working in those areas, give them the tools, give them access to our network. And I should say, our founder, Leon Alkali, worked at 32 years at JPL, is one of the foremost experts in sort of the space economy, if you will. We've got a stable of technical experts that I think is unrivaled anywhere out there. And so there's a lot of components. Space is complex. There's a lot of components that we need to look at. But all those things that you talk about are things that we're interested in doing. So I'm not sure how to answer how are we segmenting these different things. But I can say that all of these are commercial opportunities that we're looking into, and we're excited to explore even more commercial opportunities that we don't even know about yet.
Cool. Infinio Capital is asking a question that I was actually going to ask you. So most space companies stayed in the pre-revenue phase for a long time. For investors, how to return capital profit from investing in space companies in a traditional time frame, 6 to 8 years?
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on what you mean by space company. You're talking about satellite companies and launch vehicles and sorts of things like this. Yes, there's huge time horizons. And I think there is a pool of patient capital out there. You're seeing that with the funding that's going on. I think last year, space companies did somewhere around $8 billion in venture funding. We're seeing heavy involvement this year as well. And so there's got to be some patient capital there for sure. I think it's high risk, high reward. How do we mitigate that risk? And certainly from Mandala Space Ventures point of view, how do we mitigate that risk to a certain point to understand that even if this is a longer time horizon, that we understand that the payoff could be quite large. And then you're starting to see, a lot of sort of traditional software companies that are focused on space. So now that you're launching a bunch of things into space, how do you manage that from a project standpoint or a mission standpoint point of view? We've got a company in our portfolio called Continuous Space that's doing that as a SaaS platform. So, mission design, et cetera. So, those payoffs may be more traditional from a venture standpoint. And I also think, M&A activity is increasing quite dramatically. If you look at, Orbital or Honeybee, which was just purchased by Blue Origin, there's more and more acquisition opportunities that I think will help sort of keep that flywheel going. But in essence, you're dealing with, yes, very capital heavy companies. And, that takes a certain type of investor in order to be there the long haul and ultimately bear the fruit.
And incidentally, you have a message from Rex saying that was a good enough answer, and he thanked you for your response.
Great. Thanks.
So we have an anonymous question here. What do you think about moonshots, no pun intended, in space? There are companies starting up like in-space manufacturing, building commercial space stations, and even asteroid mining. These are much longer timelines as far as product deliverables. How do venture funds justify funding such ventures?
Yeah, I think there's tons of awesome activity around manufacturing in space, mining in space. If you look further down the road of what people are talking about, building much larger stations on the moon where people could live for much longer periods of time, et cetera. And I think these are all super exciting avenues to explore. I think what it takes to get there and the technologies that are needed to make these things come to life are exciting areas of investment as well. You're absolutely right. I think there's going to be some real big misses in these areas just because they're really hard problems and they're very capital intensive. But I think we're going to push the envelope. Again, that's the most exciting thing for me about sort of the space area as a whole. There's just so much unknown out there, and we are pushing the sort of the frontier here. And so you're going to see a lot of moonshots that seem far-fetched and straight out of sci-fi that I think are closer than you might realize. If you had told me that you could be anywhere in the world and get broadband internet, 10 years ago, I would have thought you were crazy. Now, maybe that's more reflection on me than is the reality of the world. But, things like this are becoming commonplace. And so, how do you go further into space? How do you maintain satellites with robotics? How do you, again, do manufacturing in space? All of these things are things that we're gonna need to figure out eventually. So why not figure them out now?
Cool. I almost wanted to ask you what are some of the interesting things you're seeing right now, but you probably can't answer that question, so I won't. So we have a question here from Avram. When you're listening to a pitch, how do you fact check the feasibility of a concept success that is outside your staff's personal envelopes of experience?
Yeah, I think, again, that's the beauty of being part of an organization like Mandala Space Ventures. We've got a team of people who are way smarter than me and are the foremost experts in areas like propulsion and launching things, and have actually put things into orbit and put things on the moon and put things into space. And so taking advantage of people far smarter than me. I like to joke that, I can't even spell technical, but what I can do is understand the dynamics that it takes to go from 0 to 1 in any business, even in space businesses. So, how do we mitigate that risk? How do we understand the feasibility? What do we as investors look for to understand whether or not this is feasible? I mean, on some level, you can just look at the physics and did the physics work out? Yes or no? And that's a pretty simple analysis. And the other is, is this the team to sort of take this from someone's mind or someone's journal or some equation and make it into a reality is what we're really focused on. So I'm less worried about the technical feasibility, or at least the ability to analyze whether it's feasible or not, and more concerned about whether whatever team we're working with, has the desire, the chops, the will to sort of, make these things a reality.
We've got another question here, kind of similar to that last question. Space exploration is not always possible for everyone. So how should a startup show that their innovation or concept is actually doable?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to do your homework as any founder would, and build a narrative around what you're trying to sell, in essence, right? I mean, you need to sell your team, you need to sell yourself, you need to sell your investors on a particular story, and what does that narrative look like? I think that's another thing that is sometimes lost in space companies, is it's so highly technical, and they're doing things that just don't make sense to ordinary men or women, and being able to tell that in a way that breeds excitement, and tell it in a way where you can start seeing the vision that this founder is telling you. It is paramount in all of these things. And I think even more so these days, where again, people who wouldn't be launching things into space 10 years ago, all of a sudden can buy a ride share on a payload that's going out and do all sorts of tests. So I think that the narrative is going to be key to funding a lot of these companies, and that will be reflected on the founder and their ability to sell that vision, and not just from the technical standpoint, is it feasible, but what does this market look like? Why is it so exciting, and why should you get involved?
Cool. And we have no questions right now. I do want to throw the last opportunity out to the audience. If you have any questions for Alex, please feel free to type it in the Q&A. And while we give folks a few minutes, I do want to point out, I think I've identified there's at least a few folks in our audience that are involved in space-related startups. If they were looking to connect with you somehow or with your company, what's the best way for them to reach out or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, listen, as a venture studio, we are in constant need of founders. So if you're working on something interesting in space, or you want some feedback on an idea you're kicking around, that's what we're here to do. Whether it's good or bad, we'll let you know one way or the other. We want to be supportive of the entire ecosystem, and I think that's our charge here. And so my email is just alex@mandalaspaceventures.com. Feel free to reach out. I may not respond quickly, but I will respond. But we're looking for founders. We're looking for companies that are in the very early stages that may need some help, getting to where they need to go. We've got a lot of experience in not only building companies, but dealing with government and writing grants and doing proposals for all sorts of 3- and 4-letter agencies. And so if we can be helpful and help you figure out if you're onto something, we're happy to do that. I feel like that's part of our job.
And we had a question that you asked, you answered part of it, what stage are you investing in, but also what size checks are you looking to write?
Yeah, from the studio side, they're very small checks, and there's some associated services with that are then sort of taken from Mandala's side from an equity perspective, because we're really a co-founder in these companies. So when we're starting something from scratch, we're bringing to the table our list of tools and our idea and why we think this is of interest, like many other startup and venture studios do. And we're looking for co-founders to help really create this company from scratch. From the venture side, it's much different, right? It's a traditional venture fund, check sizes ranging from, I'd say, $50K to $1 million at this point. But we're looking at early stage opportunities, and certainly from the studio side, the earliest stage opportunities. But hopefully, down the road, we can start taking advantage of other opportunities we see out there. But right now, it's the very early stages of company creation.
We've got one question here. It sounds like someone looking to start something and looking for an idea. Is there an unsolved problem that no one's going after in space that you think someone should be going after?
If I could tell you, I would start the company. But I can tell you broadly that there's lots of ideas out there, lots of white space where I think enterprising individuals can take advantage. And I would hope that, again, not only do we want people who are working in space to come and chat with us about what they may be doing, people coming out of all sorts of, traditional aerospace corporations or places like JPL, Caltech, but also just really smart founders who want to get involved in the space ecosystem. We're happy to work with you to figure out ideas and things that we think, might be successful. And so I think, as we build Mandala Space Ventures, founders are going to be the core component of what we do. And so I'm always excited to talk to somebody who's intelligent about building anything and figure out if there's opportunities to do it with us and do it in space.
And so we have another question. Can you elaborate on the services of the venture studio?
Yeah, I think the services we provide are sort of twofold. One, table stakes that most studios provide, which is the administrative side of legal and financial and HR and things, again, where you want to just have your founders and the team focused on building products and serving customers, not dealing with the administrative side of things. I think the other component that is unique to Mandala is our list of technical advisors. So again, we have people that have had very high positions in level of government, very high positions in actually launching things into orbit, that we feel matches up and surpasses, frankly, anybody who's out there. And so if you're doing anything space related and you need some sort of technical eyes from folks who've done it in the past on your project or on your idea, we can bring that to the table. And so there's sort of a technical component that I think other studios don't have that makes us unique. But again, the main focus here is how do we accelerate a company's growth by letting them focus just on product, just on customers, and taking the other things out of the way and helping them handle that from our side.
Cool. Well, we are about at time. Alex has graciously agreed he can stick around for a couple extra minutes if anyone has a last question for him. And if you check our chat, you can find links to follow Alex's company, to follow Innovate Pasadena on YouTube. We do record these sessions and post them on YouTube and LinkedIn at a later date. So if you missed anything from Alex, check back and you can catch up on all of his great information later. And Alex, any last words, thoughts that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I'm just so excited about this space. It's growing. It's hard, it's challenging. It can affect everything from climate change to communications to all sorts of things. So, if you're building something in this area, or you're working at a large organization in this area and you're thinking about spinning something out or doing something on your own, come talk to us. We'd love to chat. Again, it's just alex@mandalaspaceventures.com. We'd love to get involved. We'd love to help any way that we can. And, this is a growing area. There's going to be tons of money coming into the area. There's going to be tons of innovations that are coming out into this area that hopefully will make humanity and Earth a little bit better as well. So I'm excited and excited to talk to anyone who wants to chat, and hope this was somewhat informative. And thank you again, Beth, Kaya, and everybody at Innovate Pasadena for having me, and onwards.
Thank you so much for joining us, Alex. This has been fantastic. Everyone, you're receiving lots of comments. Everyone finds it very informative. I'm super excited to see what kinds of cool stuff starts coming out of your venture firm and just the Pasadena area in general, of course, a little biased there. But we really appreciate your time today. Thank you, everybody in the audience who joined us, and check back later for our next Innovate Pasadena Ask an Expert. Thank you.